Right, hello and welcome to tonight's Fabian Women's Network event. Our event tonight is on writing to be heard, and it's an event we put together just really following on from last week's event about women in writing, just really so people can find out more about writing so that your writing is heard. So my name is Kelly Grean. I'm one of the exec members for FWN and very, very grateful to be one too. So if I can ask everyone as we go along, if you've got any questions, to please put them in the Q&A and we'll ask them at a later point in tonight. So we have two fantastic panelists with us tonight who I'm delighted to announce. So the first person we'll be going over to is Shaista Aziz, who is a fellow member of the Fabian Women's Network. In fact, she's co-vice chair. She's a journalist. You might have seen her on programmes like Sky News, and she's quite a regularly asked to appear on things like LBC. She also is a campaigner and she works for Solace, and she's a great writer. We'll put some links to some things that she's done later on. So Shaista, if we can go over to you now.
Hi everyone, good evening. First of all, Kelly, thank you so much for organising this, and also the Fabian Women's Network for opening up this space. It's great to be here with Kate, who I'm going to talk a little bit about as well. Kate, I hope that's not going to make you blush too much. Writing to be heard. Well, first of all, as we know, as women, throughout history, our voices have not always been heard. Women, specifically with intersectional identities, we are talking on the first day of Black History Month. So Black women, for example, particularly working class Black women, queer Black women, their voices in particular have been suppressed, deliberately so, over many, many hundreds of years. So it's not a given that our voices will be heard. And it's also not a given that we will always have confidence as women to speak and to actually express ourselves in the way we want to, in the way that we feel comfortable to do so as well, because of that thing called patriarchy, which means that we are very much, I believe as women, often without unconsciously also absorbing the kind of codes around us around that. However, it's a very exciting time to, I think, express yourself. The world is in crisis, and when we're in a crisis, I think we need to go out and seek more stories that connect us as human beings and that connect our realities and that enable us to build a brave, bold vision of where we need to get to, not where we are, but where we need to get to. And without a doubt, this is a really important time in history to tell stories, to articulate yourself, and to find ways to do it. So I know we're going to talk about this a bit more, so I'll kind of wrap up my opening remarks there, but I've got some ideas about how we do that. And one thing that really enables us to do that is finding other women who will stand with us, who will encourage us, and who will listen to us. And Kate is someone very much ticks all those boxes. I met Kate at a Labour Party fringe meeting, a conference a couple of years ago in Liverpool, and it was a packed out room, and I asked a question from the floor, and at the end Kate came over to me and said, thank you for asking that question. And she asked me a few questions about myself, and then she said, would you like to write something and stay in touch? And I raised that here because I really appreciated Kate coming up to me and having that conversation. But also I really appreciated the fact that Kate was curious enough to want to know a little bit more about me and find out a bit more about my views. So when we are looking to write or blog or whatever it is we want to do, even tweet, that's all part of writing as well. I think it's really important to be curious about our own views, where we're getting our views from, where we're getting our information from, but about each other as well, and to seek each other out, to find out more about what we believe in, but also to support each other. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Shaista. There was so much you said there that really excited me and made me feel like going and starting writing tonight straight away. And I think the point you made about Kate encouraging you is so important for all of us as women and aspiring writers, about encouraging each other, because actually it takes a great deal of bravery to ever write down anything that you think or feel, or to create character or anything like that. But it's so important. And so much of the women's movement has come from women telling stories and being honest. And sometimes you really need encouragement, and and faith in yourself to do that. So it's important we give each other that faith, I think. Okay, so we're going to go without any further ado now over to Kate Murray, who is editorial lead at the Fabians and is in charge of our magazine Fabian Review. So Kate, over to you.
Hi Kelly, hi everyone. I echo the thanks for you for organising this. It's a great event. I was asked to talk a little bit about my own background. So I'm editorial director of the Fabians, which means I edit the Fabian Review magazine and the books and pamphlets that we put out. My background is in journalism. I started off on local papers, weekly and then daily regional papers. I then edited a magazine for the social housing sector called Inside Housing. And then when my kids were tiny, I went freelance and I did quite a lot of social issues reporting for The Guardian and for various other people before going to the Fabians. As a journalist, I think I just wanted to briefly mention that women are really underrepresented at a senior level in journalism. And I really echo what Shasta said, that we need to encourage and support each other. There's a really great organisation called Women in Journalism. They did some research a few years ago which showed they looked at all the front pages and the front page bylines, and they found out that 78% of all front page bylines in their survey were written by men and 22% by women across national newspapers. I thought this was astonishing, and it was a few years back, so I did my own little unscientific survey before speaking tonight, and it was only of the last, as I say, very unscientific, only of the last 7 days, but across national newspapers. And it was pretty much similar. I think it was something like 28% women bylined on the front page. So although there are a lot of women going into journalism, into writing, there is a problem with representation at the more senior level. So to talk a bit about the Fabian Review, and that's, you know, we are not commissioning by and large professional journalists. Sometimes we are lucky enough to get people, you know, like Shasta, who are journalists, but we commission right across the range of academics, campaigners, activists, politicians, really to give a sort of breadth of what's going on across the labour movement. So we do not expect people to be professional writers. We work really hard to get a good gender balance, as well as across other diversity strands. But, you know, I think there is a real problem that the majority of our pitches, people who will get in touch, are men. And the people who will be the most persistent are men. So to achieve, you know, to get a good representative batch of contributors, we have to ask women to write more than women ask us. And I know this is a problem across all outlets. A former colleague of mine, who is now one of the comment editors on The Independent, started a debate on social media about this and said she wanted more women to pitch because it's overwhelmingly men who both make that first approach, but also are much more persistent in following up, whereas women will sometimes be put off. We do some work with the Fabian Women's Mentoring Scheme, where we work with the mentees who want to, they're encouraged to submit ideas to us. And I'm really in favour of that. We've had some really lovely stuff, and people are often, if they haven't been published before, not sure of the process. And a lot of what we do is about demystifying it and saying it's not so scary. You don't have to pitch a fully formed piece. You can just send a couple of bullet points as an idea. We can work with you to shape it into something for publication. And don't be frightened of the editing process. It's a learning process for everyone. And I've got a number of years of experience in journalism and writing, but I still learn from people who write for us in the way that they approach things, and it's a collaborative process, I think. And I think the final thing I want to say is, don't be afraid of having opinions. You don't need to, when you're writing, think that you need to be the world expert on everything and write an academic essay on it. Having a strong, coherent opinion is all you need, and that's what we should be doing, you know, in sort of political writing, is allowing people to express an opinion, working with them to get it out there, because it's through that sort of diversity of opinion that, you know, that's our strength, I think. I'll leave it there, but really, really happy. I didn't want to say much more than that, so that people can, you know, I can tailor answers to people's questions on what's most useful. But thanks very much.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I totally echo what you're saying, Kate. I think a lot of times when women in particular come to me and say, oh, I'd like to get a piece published, they're very clear about where they want to get it published. Often they'll say The Guardian, for example. And when if I will come back to them and say, well, what's your views? They're kind of like, well, I don't really know. And when I've given media training in the past to women in particular, often you find that actually no one's really asked for an individual woman's opinion before. No one's ever wanted to hear what she has to say. Perhaps she's not really thought about what she has to say because she doesn't really feel it's of particular value to anyone. So I think the first thing is to always be clear about what you believe your views are on X, Y, or Z. And once you're clear on that, then you've got the foundations to write, to communicate clearly, hopefully, on what you want to say.
That's brilliant, thank you. Kate, I just want to say I've had 2 text messages complimenting you on your bookshelves while you've been talking, so I thought it was only right to pass those on to you.
Thanks, and read a lot. I think that's another factor, isn't it?
Absolutely, and try and read a diverse range of things, because we're all in the habits now of living in echo chambers to some degree. I guess a lot of good articles get you riled up if you don't agree with them, and that's not necessarily always a bad thing. So I'm just thinking about, I know Margaret Atwood said that if she waited till she was perfect, she would never have written a word. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. And for me, I started blogging on my own kind of page, knowing that not a lot of people would read it, but it gradually gave me the confidence getting comments to kind of start sending things off and things like that. So how would you kind of advise people that are concerned about their ability? How can you know if you're good at writing, or where can you go if you feel like you've probably got some ability, but you're a bit frightened of the reaction of putting it out there?
Who would you like to answer that? Who goes first?
Either of you. I thought one of you would push in. So let's go to you first, Shai.
So I'd say, first of all, when you're writing, it's really important to be humble. So we're living in a world where everybody wants instant results, okay, and instant gratification and everything else. Some of us are trained journalists, like Kate and myself. We've been trained. We've spent many years in newsrooms and writing, and we've had our pieces. I'm sure I don't want to speak for you, Kate, but I'm sure we've experienced having our pieces completely dismantled and put back together. But as Kate said, it's all about learning, and it's about being fortunate enough actually to learn from good people around you who want to put that effort into making a piece stronger and better and more communicable. It's a team effort, right? I do sometimes find it interesting how in the world of in the era of social media, there seems to be this belief that everyone's a journalist. Well, they're not. Journalists are still journalists. They've been trained to be journalists. They've been trained to understand how to piece things together, how to get information, how to verify things. And I think, sadly, sometimes our profession is just kind of like seen as being something that anyone and everyone can do. Now, I don't say that in terms of trying to be elitist. That's the exact opposite of what I am. But I'm saying that because I think it's important to understand that, there's opinion pieces, there's factual news, there's features, there's a whole array of things. But the first thing to do is believe in yourself, which I know is not always easy, but as you said, you set up a blog, you decided to go for it, you decided to write, you dipped your toe in and you got on with it. Enjoy it. Enjoy writing, and find out what what it is about writing that you enjoy. Hopefully you're going to enjoy it. It's not going to be really difficult to find that enjoyment, because I think that keeps you sustained and going. And be really, that word authentic is often thrown out, right? But I think it is important to be authentic, because I think people can pick up on that. They can understand that someone's voice is coming from a place of experience and truth and reality. Now, just to caveat that, women are often asked to pour our hearts out, to explain about some horror that's taken place in our lives for mass consumption. So I don't mean to pour out your experiences that you find painful and difficult to share with the world, unless you want to do that, right? But I think, again, it goes back to being around people who are going to be honest with you, but build up your confidence to enable you to understand what your voice is. So I think those are the main things. But not everyone's going to win the Pulitzer Prize. Not everyone's going to get the front page of the Guardian. Not everyone's going to end up, writing a book. That's okay. That doesn't mean that you can't write. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't write. It just means that there's different tiers and layers to this. But it's success, whatever that means. Okay, I think we also live in a world where everyone has to be successful. I think we have to also value our stories and our narratives ourselves, and put them out there with confidence in the way that we want to put them out there.
Thank you. And Kate?
Yeah, I think I would say that it's true. You need to kind of get your ideas out there. Don't be discouraged if you get knocked back. Quite often it's because it's not quite right for that particular time. But if you can develop a relationship with the commissioning editor, you can discuss what might work, and don't give up, because quite often journalists and commissioning editors, if you're putting something out there, they're quite busy, and they want people who come to them with ideas. So it's really, really good to just persist with that. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, and Liz has put a nice comment in about a good editor will save your blushes. I think that's true. It is a very much a sort of collaborative process. Don't be too precious about what you send. There may be the kernel of a great idea which can just be honed to work for that particular publication, and it's not necessarily a reflection on the way that you might have first envisaged it. If you can get something that works both for you and for the publication, and the editing process itself, I mean, that's how you learn. When I started off, I had a ferocious sub-editor who used to tear up the articles we wrote and throw them across the newsroom, which is not something that I would really recommend. But I certainly learned a lot from people who could tell me that doesn't work and this is why it doesn't work, and you really, really benefit from good editing.
Thank you. I'm getting some nice messages of people saying how much they're enjoying this evening, so thank you both. I think for me as well, writing is sort of a bit of rebellion, in that so much bad stuff is happening, so many things I want to kind of comment on, and sometimes I find it really cathartic just to write a sort of moany article for myself, and if anyone wants to read it, great, but I just feel better for having got that opinion out there. So I don't know if that's something you both find.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like I said, there's lots of different ways to write, and we write for a number of reasons, but sometimes if we just need to get things written on a piece of paper, right, or on a computer screen to feel better about things. And I think that's all part of the process of writing, and I think it's important to remember that. I know a lot of people feel quite annoyed, for want of a better term, about Twitter, for example, but again, it's all about how you write and who you're engaging with through your writing. So are you using Twitter as an example? Because when Meghan Markle and Prince Harry decided to leave the country, there was all this noise, shall we say. And I was asked to go on to a national radio station to talk about whether there was racism involved in the coverage of Meghan Markle. And so I had an exchange with the producer. And in the end, I just asked the producer, I said, are you asking me to write, to comment on the evidence of racism, or do you want me to look at the evidence of racism and say it's not there? To which the producer said, don't worry, we probably won't do this piece. So I put this out on Twitter, okay? But I did it in a way, I believe in compassion. So I was not going to name the radio station. I do not like pylons. I don't like bullying. I wasn't going to do that. So I didn't name the radio station. I obviously didn't name the producer. I didn't put any screen grabs on. I'm not going to do that. But I did explain what happened. And it went viral, and it was really interesting, because one of the things that I understood from that was, first of all, people were really shocked that you can actually push back to journalists and do it in a polite, courteous way, but get your point across. And guess what, folks, you can. We still live in a world where that's possible, right? You can bring nuance to a discussion, and you can stand your ground, but do it in a way that is not hostile. Sometimes people want you to be hostile, okay, because it's good, it's clickbait, but that tweet went viral, and as a result, I got invited to come to a conference. I was invited to onto 2 other radio programs to talk about this issue of how we discuss things, and also the whole notion of debating racism rather than actually tackling racism. So this goes back to my earlier point about knowing what you believe in and knowing what you think, because if you can crack those 2 things, then you can blog, you can write, you can articulate yourself in many different ways.
Fantastic. I really like that story as well. So I've got another question here. It's, how can you go from writing opinion pieces for free to getting paid for articles? Either of you want to answer that?
So, I mean, there is no denying it's quite a tough market out there. Having freelanced myself, I know it's not easy. And I think I find it really, really difficult when people who make their living out of journalism are told that, we'll publish your piece, but we haven't got any budget and it's just for exposure. I have a problem with this in a sense because the Fabian Review doesn't pay its contributors. That's because we're not a big media company, and a lot of the people we commission are not making their living from writing, and so we would never expect people to write for free. It's a kind of movement, a paper to reflect the debate on the left. But I do struggle with it because I think that it's so tough out there for freelance journalists. So, but I just think the message really has to be to persist and don't undersell yourself with organisations and publications who can afford it. And the NUJ is very good at giving freelance rates for different publications. And if you are serious about, making it your profession, then join the NUJ and sort of have a look at how you should be pitching your, request for payment.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. And there's a reason why journalism in this country is such an elite, white, privileged profession. If you look at the makeup of newsroom journalists, overwhelmingly they are individuals who have gone to private school and overwhelmingly people who've gone to Oxbridge. They are not reflective of the wider population. The representation in newsrooms is utterly woeful, and in 2020, with the reinvigoration of the Black Lives Matter movement in particular, we are seeing another added layer of focus on this issue. Now, when I got into journalism, I worked free for a year. I just did lots of work experience. I ended up sleeping on friends' floors. I don't live in London. I'm from Oxford. I'm the first person in my family to go to university. There's very few women who look like me in journalism now, let alone then. But I persisted, and it was really, really hard. There's nothing there's no point glossing over this. It was very, very hard. And then I went for a job. This is very interesting, which is why I'm sharing this story, okay? I went for a job. I freelanced for the BBC, then I went for a job because one of my editors sat me down and said, you should apply for this job. And I looked at the job and it said community affairs researcher, and I understood what this meant. This was code for we need Black people or brown people to apply for jobs, because when the term community is used, it's very rarely used for white people, okay? So she said to me, apply for this job because it'd be really good for you to get your foot in the door, and then you can build your career up. So the point here is have good people around you as well, advising you on how to navigate through this system. And so I applied for the job, and I was told that 500 people applied for this job. And I got down to the last 2 and I didn't get the job, but I got on the back of all my interviews and tests, I got a BBC traineeship. So the point here is sometimes when you're going into something and you think you really want it to be able to get to where you need to, other pathways open up. So just be open to that, but let's not gloss over anything. It's really, really hard. But good places to start are to like use your local newspaper, for example, because they are really short of journalists. Massive cuts have been made across this industry. Huge revenue has been lost, and COVID is making it even harder. So start with writing letters, regular letters as well, because if you're interested in writing opinion pieces, people will start picking up, editors, journalists will start picking up on the fact that you've written some good letters, you know, you've got something to say, you're an interesting individual, and they will come to you and then ask you to do things. But also, do not feel afraid to go to people. And Kate's point about don't be precious, rejection is not personal. Don't feel offended if you get rejected. The thing is, you're going to get rejected loads and loads. For every 25 pitches, you're going to hear back every now and then, but that's not personal to you. So keep going, stay focused, and be aware and investigate the different avenues that are open to you. So for example, Galdem is a publication that has come about because there's been a complete lack of representation of Black women and people of colour and queer people of colour in these spaces. And so now, you know, a group of amazing, incredible women set this up, and it's just completely taken off. So you can find other sources to take your work. It doesn't, and that doesn't mean that they're going to have lower standards, just to be very clear, but you've got to go and be creative about where you're pitching things as well.
Oh, we lost Shyster, I think.
Yeah, that all froze for me.
Okay, we'll wait for Shyster to come back. It's a shame because I was really enjoying what she was saying there. I think her connection's just gone down, which is very unfortunate. Kate, was there anything you wanted to add to what Shyster was saying?
No, I think I'd covered, you know, I think what I wanted to on that subject, but happy to take any follow-ups.
I think that the point that Shyster makes about so many journalists being from the same very privileged background, from such a small kind of demographic is really relevant. And I wonder if this is kind of a reason why people are less interested perhaps in mainstream newspapers, and so many people get their news from other avenues now, because people in the mainstream newspapers are not writing what people want to read, because it's so out of kilter with what people, with the lives people actually live. I'm just wondering, and I'm just thinking as well about how kind of important it is that we have stories from people from all walks of life, because in the future these stories form our history, and without them, you know, there's so much missing from the history that we read. For example, Olive Morris, who was a campaigner in Southeast London, is one of my sort of big bugbears that I can't find anything she wrote down, and there's very little writing about her. So I think I'll just reiterate what we said earlier about how important it is for people to put pen to paper, because what seems quite ordinary now, or doesn't seem that interesting to people, actually later on becomes really kind of essential.
Yeah, and I think one of the areas that we sort of touched on earlier, that I would just kind of to build on that, was about if you're not writing full-length pieces, what you're saying on social media or in other forums that you're involved in can be really important, because I know that we now on the magazine I'm commissioning, and in the past, to try and avoid speaking to the same usual suspects all the time would actually be proactively looking for new voices. And it's quite an important, you know, if you can, and you know, journalists are quite busy sometimes, so they might go to someone that they know will turn something around for them quite quickly. But equally, there is a big part of our work is about identifying new voices and trying to platform them. And so I think there are sort of different channels through which you can be seen, and that people might ask you on the back of that to do something.
Yeah, I'm sorry everyone, I dropped off, but I'm back, even though you can't see me.
Now.
It's okay. And I know I missed what you said, Kate, so apologies for dropping off. But the other thing is, please put people forward, suggest people. Okay, yeah. So the whole point of, you know, we can't just try and colonize all the space for ourselves, because believe you and me, it doesn't get us anywhere, right? So really open up space, open up as much space as you can for other women, because when their voices are heard, you're more likely to have your voice heard as well. That's just a fact. So I was commissioned by the New York Times to write something, and it was because a group of women I've never met before in my entire life on Twitter recommended me to the commissioning editor, and I asked her, you know, where she got my details from, and she told me. And I was really touched, I was really moved by that. And the reason why those women did that was because they obviously knew this woman, and she put a call out to them and said, I'm looking for some voices to write about X or Y, and they'd been following some of my work. And so they put me forward, and I thought that was such an incredibly wonderful act of sisterhood and solidarity. And there are many women who don't want to do that. We've got to be honest about that. Pulling the ladder up behind you is sadly a very normal thing, but it doesn't get you anywhere. It really doesn't, particularly in the current climate we're in, which is awful. And the more voices we have, more humane, focused voices, feminist voices we have, the better, because it just builds up to a crescendo. So we need to really go out of our way to help ensure those voices are heard. And we know that there are many voices out there who are deliberately not heard. So this whole thing about empowering people to be heard, people don't need empowering, they need gatekeepers to open the gates so they can be heard. There's no such thing as the voiceless. It's whether people want to hear you or not. We choose who we want to listen to. We all do it every day. You said, Kelly, about you know, you talked about echo chambers. We can all function in echo chambers, but we can see the state of the country because of that. So we've got to be, I think, we've got to live our feminist principles. And some days that's not easy when you think someone's going to get ahead of you. That's the way it goes, right? But it ultimately doesn't get us anywhere. And I think that's what we've got to try and really build.
Thank you, Shaista. So in the period we briefly lost you, I was just sort of commenting on what you were speaking about just before, about how unrepresentative the media is. And I was saying about how when we look back on our history, so many stories are missing because they were just never written down. And I was saying, like, Olive, it bothers me that I can't find anything Olive Morris wrote, and just, you know, so much that we're missing. So even if you don't ever intend for someone to read something you're writing, I think things like keeping diaries that probably people do less now, I think it's important for those things to still be in existence. So future things that we feel are very ordinary actually will be really interesting to people in the future. So I would just kind of encourage people, even if they don't ever think what they're writing will be read, to write it, put it in a box, and, you know, see what comes of it. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love hearing stories. I genuinely do. For me, stories are what enables me to connect with myself and with everybody else. And I think that's what we need. We need more stories to be able to understand each other, and to be able to connect all our experiences together. And that's what you're supposed to do as human beings. As I said at the beginning of the conversation, we're supposed to be curious about each other. We're not supposed to believe that we've got everything sorted, we know everything, because we don't. It's a very sad existence to believe you know everything, I think anyway. And I'm on a quest to learn from everyone around me. And sometimes you'll write something and you'll go back a week later and think, oh my goodness me, what was that nonsense? Or you'll go back and think, wow, that was really good. And I think it's important to have a bit of both, because it kind of keeps you grounded. But also when you're telling a story, think about why you want to tell it and who you want to tell it to, and also think about what your role is in telling the story. So if you're just if someone's just constantly centering themselves in every story, that's not really a story, is it? So yeah, so there's lots of things to think about, but the main thing is your point, Kelly, which is just, you know, write things down, write them. History is you know, it's called his story for a reason, isn't it? So I think there's a greater effort being made more than ever for those suppressed voices to be heard. And I'm just going to finish on this one point, which is I recently realized I have not read a book by a male writer for such a long time. And so I kept myself in check then and went and did some Googling and searching to find the kind of books I'd like to read by men. I hadn't done that on purpose, by the way, but just because I mean, everything is written by men, so I'm automatically reading it, right? I have to go out of my way to engage and read voices that are not represented. But then that hit me. I thought, okay, I should go off and try and start looking into that. So I did. So be consciously aware of where you're getting your information from and your thoughts and ideas from as well.
You know, I think you raised such a good point on that, because I think when Girl, Woman, Other co-won the Booker Prize, I think it opened up a world for so many people where, certainly for myself, I hadn't noticed that I wasn't reading books by women of colour. It just wasn't something I was massively aware of. And, you know, I read books here and there, and I read a lot of Andrea Levy and things, but reading that book, it was like an awakening of, oh, I've just been hearing the same voices over and over. And I think that people can talk about how important is the Booker Prize. Certainly last year, I think it was massively important. So many white women I speak to say that book taught me so much. I only read it because it won the prize. And I think really we need to keep ourselves in check about what we are reading and what voices we're hearing, because that's the narrative. That's the narrative to our kind of lives, isn't it? That becomes our normal. I've got a question. Do you have any tips on pitching and what to include in that first approach? So Kate, can I go to you first on that one?
Yeah, I think keep it really brief would be my key.
When you say really brief, how kind of, I think when I was first pitching, I thought I was really not sure whether like brief meant 50 words or 500. So could you
I think it means nearer 50 than 500, but you know, a few points, a few sentences, show that you know about the publication that you're approaching. Don't just send out a blanket email, because I've seen so many of them, and that's the sort of one that you would discard first if it's just, I think this is for you, and clearly they don't know enough about your magazine or your publication, and they're off beam with saying that. But I think if you, assuming that it's a publication you know and that you're to be keen to write for, just say why. You know, I noticed that you had a really interesting piece in your last issue about so and so. Have you considered this angle? Because I've been thinking about it, and I think I could write something really different, and here's why. And just a couple of sentences. You don't need to have a massive portfolio to show. You don't need to sort of append previous published work. If you've got anything that you're particularly proud of, you could just send a link. But really, I think it's the enthusiasm and the kind of quality of your initial idea, and everything then stems from that. Some of the stuff we were talking about earlier about working together to kind of hone a pitch, and the editor you're approaching might say, yes, I really like that bit, but could you also include so and so? And then it becomes a dialogue.
I agree with that. Keep it brief is absolutely the key. Also, there's lots of different ways to pitch these days. As I said, writing Twitter threads on something, it gets a lot of attention. A lot of times in the last year in particular, I've got paid journalism work based on that, when people are like, oh, I saw your tweet about X or Y, and actually I'm working on a program, or I'm writing a piece, or I want to commission someone. A lot of opinion people are on Twitter, and their DMs are open. So be aware and careful about how you approach people. If you're just constantly approaching them with not very well thought out ideas, they're just going to stop reading the really good ideas, because they've kind of got used to you sending things to them that aren't quite what they're looking for. So going back to Kate's point, definitely know your audience, like know that writer, know the editor, know what they've published recently. If there's a particular hard-hitting issue that they're working on, go to them and give them some information as well, because journalists always appreciate people who give them things to work on as well, and that builds trust. So I think building networks and building trust up is all part of learning how to pitch properly as well. And the final thing I'd say is, more than any other time, as I said, journalism has been very hard hit by cuts. We know there's lots of job losses everywhere, sadly. So if people are not getting back to you straight away, go elsewhere. Don't just sit on an idea and expect one publication to just go with it. Give it a few days. If you're not hearing back, go somewhere else. If that idea is something that you really want to bring to life, then it's your job to keep going and to get it seen by someone.
Thank you. That's all really, really good advice. Is there anything else that springs to mind that you would say to anyone who's an aspiring writer? Anything that kind of has happened to you along the journey that you think would be really good advice? Kate, should we go to you first?
I really think that the kind of establishing a dialogue and establishing a rapport is really important. But I think the message I want people to take away from tonight is that everyone has something to say. I don't agree that everyone has a book in them, because not all of us do, but we do all have something important to say. And I think if you know what you want to say and you're passionate about it, that really, really goes a long way. I've been lucky enough to write about things that I'm really, really interested in throughout my career. I started on, as I said, on local and regional newspapers, not always them, but it was a really good grounding for me. But then after that, writing about social issues, social policy and politics, it's something that I live and breathe anyway. And so it's an immense privilege to be in that environment. And I think, we all know people, we all have a bit of that ourselves, because we're all here tonight. So I think, have confidence that what you're saying is worth getting out there, and keep at it.
Yeah, I totally echo that. The key to this is to know what you think, what you want to say, and why you want to say it. And I'll repeat myself just very briefly. There's a lot of people who don't really know what they think and what they want to say, but they believe that they should be published. Well, we've got to know what we need to say, and also don't be afraid to say it, unless it, of course, is horrendous, in which case no need. But plenty of people publishing horrendous viewpoints everywhere. But on a serious note, really know what you believe, and then build the confidence to say it, and to articulate it clearly. And building the confidence goes back to that whole point of building a squad of overwhelmingly, I think there probably will be women who will support you, who will give you good feedback. Don't be defensive if people are asking you questions. As I said, we should be curious about each other, right? Also, there will be lots of people who want to pigeonhole you and will only come to you to ask you to write about X, Y, or Z. If you want to write about X, Y, and Z, you should. But if you want to write about A, B, and C, you should do that as well. So over the last 3 years, I'm going to use the dreaded word Brexit just for a second. I really can count very clearly on how many times I've seen women talking about Brexit, particularly women of colour. Our voices have not been heard on Brexit. So I did put myself forward for a few Brexit things, and journalists contacted me as well. And they were a bit surprised that I had something to say about Brexit, for example. So be counterintuitive as well. Don't just kind of go with the flow on what you think somebody might, where someone might want to hear you. Believe in yourself enough to put yourself forward. Like I said, that's not easy. I'm not saying it is, right? And the other thing I want to just touch on very briefly is the whole backlash that women get when we put our views out as well. This is very real. And the backlash includes racism and misogyny. So the point I'm going to raise here is that is a reality, horrifically, it is. We have to face that. But I hope that it won't put, I hope that we can build those solidarity networks to support each other and to give each other the confidence to still keep going. Because people only react like that when you're doing something that's triggering them. So if your appearance is triggering them as a woman, and then, as a woman of color or a black woman or a hijabi, whatever it is, whatever's triggering them, it means that you're doing something right by breathing, standing upright and doing what you love and doing your job. So just keep going, reach out to people, reach out to the Fabian Women's Network, others, get that support, build the support, because honestly, it really, really helps, and it keeps you strong and it keeps you going.
Just a little add-on to that, one of the best pieces of advice I had when I first went freelance was never read below the line. And the below the line comments on pieces when you're published on a national outlet, and people can be absolutely vicious in a way that they wouldn't be face to face. I mean, social media, we all know, but also in terms of challenging, and I think it is often women's opinions. And why have you said that? You know nothing about this subject, kind of thing. Just don't engage.
Absolutely don't engage in it. But I think for all of us that read pieces we like by people we like their opinions, I think it's important for us to say that as well and try and drown out the negativity, because I think so often we read things and enjoy them, but it doesn't really cross our mind to kind of just put a quick tweet underneath saying love this, thank you. That I think that really can make a difference. And I think we need to get better. We need to get better at speaking out about what's good rather than taking it.
And share articles written by women, and just retweet. It takes nothing to retweet, nothing. But there's still a lot of people, particularly women, who don't want to do it because, again, I told you, we're all pitted up against each other because of patriarchy. But the more we do it, the easier it becomes for those of us who feel that way. And there are valid reasons for why we feel that way, by the way. And it just becomes easier, and we create this like circle of support, don't we?
Yeah, circle of support. Excellent. I like that. Sorry, Kate, were you going to say something?
No, I was just agreeing with Shaista there.
I think what tonight has really brought home for me is just the importance of having wider voices in the media. And I think so much we don't know because it's just not out there. And I think we all have a responsibility to try and counter that, really, whether it's by writing ourselves, sharing things, making sure we make an effort to read things we wouldn't normally read, or read by people we wouldn't normally read. I think that's really resonated so strongly with me tonight, and hopefully with other people as well. Yeah,
and I think just to build on what we were just talking about there, don't be frightened of asking advice. I've actually, where people are not pitching something to me, but I've said, what do you think about this idea? Where should I try and place it? Or what do you think of this? I think people are more willing to help than we sometimes think, and it can be intimidating sometimes to try and approach particularly a bigger organisation. And I think we can all show solidarity and sisterhood by helping each other out and things like that.
Absolutely. This evening I tried to pitch something to a big publication that I don't normally go to, and the comment editor got back to me and said, this is going to be a hard sell, but that doesn't mean you should write it. But I'm just being honest with you and saying, while I believe in this issue, I think it's going to be hard for me to get this past my nose, right, to other people. And I really appreciated that. And that honest conversation came about through many years of building that trust and that relationship. And that's, to me, that's not negative feedback. To me, that's like gold dust feedback, because it means that I can focus my limited energies and capacity right now on something else, which will hopefully enable that piece I'm trying to write to get out there, right? Or will enable me to think differently about it and make me work harder to work out what would need to change for that publication to take it. So yeah, so being open to feedback, constructive feedback, is really important. And I think it just makes us sharper, better writers. And your point, Kate, about reading, I mean, obviously you're surrounded by lots of books there as well. Just read as much as you can, because honestly, it makes you a much sharper writer. And also it's really good. It's good for the soul, I think, just to read stories and engage with creativity.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming along tonight, both of you. I think this has been a really inspiring, really useful night. We will put this video on YouTube, and it is on Facebook Live for anyone that wants to watch it back, or perhaps share it with another sister who might find it useful. Please do think about doing that. Can I just give special thanks to Maddie, who has jumped in and done Twitter for us at the last minute. So thank you very much, Maddie. Is there anything you two would like to say before we close?
I'd just like to say, get in touch if you've got something that you think needs to get out there.
Yeah, same. If anybody wants to get in touch, they're very welcome to. But I want to thank you, Kelly, for all the hard work you've been putting into these webinars, and also thank the Fabian Women's Network for their consistent support.
Brilliant. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.